Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And hi, Lawrence, Zach,
Hi.
and Laura. So I'm just gonna quickly introduce who Lawrence is from from the outside, and then we can talk more about it with Lawrence himself right here. Okay. So Lawrence, you are a writer and artist in many forms, and you are the editor of the South Dakota State Poetry Society. And actually, the more I talk to people about you, the more I realized I actually don't know enough about you. So, and you made like a living in radio, television, and public performance for over 40 years. And you were
Actually,
right?
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that in your thing.
Yeah.
It was only 10 years I was in radio and TV. I mean, I still do stuff. I dabble in it, but I don't make my living in it anymore.
Oh, that's a
I
correct.
actually retired when I was 35 from radio. And I retired with the idea that I was going to have fun for 5 years and then work till I die, because I noticed that people, when they retired, they died in 5 years. So I figured I don't want to be like a cripple and retire. And I want to retire now and have fun. And then when I'm crippled, I can work.
Okay. Wow. So you decided to retire from the radio that young.
I just really retired, period. I just
Oh, yeah.
traveled around, had fun, do all the things that people
Wow.
try to do when they're retired. Then I said, okay, I'll go back to work. Because instead of having the 5 years at the end when you're miserable, sick, and crippled, I figure I put it in the middle where I can have fun. And then when I'm out, I'm out.
That's crazy.
Well, it made sense to me.
Wow. Yeah, no, it makes sense. But how did you, so you must have a plan before that, right? Like you made this plan and then.
Yeah. I made the plan because when I was in radio, there was a lot of old guys, some of whom this may mean nothing to most of you, but there was a famous show called The Lone Ranger. It was a cowboy show, right? And he did the radio of that. That's how old he was. In other words, when radio was there wasn't no TV. There was just radio. So these guys were retiring, and I noticed that they were retired, and soon after that, within a year or two, they were dead, and I'm thinking, what a miserable thing. This guy's looking forward to retirement. He finally saves this money, puts all the money in the bank, gets everything together, and he dies. I think that's not going to be homey. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die young and having fun. I ain't going to be dying old. And, so I figure, I'm not going to be living to the dream. I'm going to spend all this money that I've made in radio and have some fun, just like people spend their retirement money. Then I'll work till I die.
Yeah, that's crazy. Because most people like at that age, like including us right now, Zach and Laura, like, we feel like we don't save enough money to even do that. Or like or maybe it's insecurity. Like, how much money do you have to save before you feel like you have the freedom? Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, people think that they need a lot of money to do a lot of things, but they don't need as much money as they think they do, because we let money be our master. And so we look to solve a problem with money before we say, how can I do this without money? To me, that's the first question we should ask. How can I do it without money? And then if I just no other way, then I'll spend the money. Not because I'm cheap, but because the more money I take, the less money I need, the richer I am. I think it was Thoreau who said, I make myself rich by making my needs few.
Right. Yeah. That's.
I think that was Thoreau. If not, I'll take credit for it. Because I don't know who to give the credit to.
That's okay. Yeah, maybe it's passed down by, I don't know, millions of people before. So,
do you have a second retirement planned?
Huh?
Do you have a second retirement planned?
No. I'm just working doing everything I think I need to do until I die. I feel like the mosquito on the windshield. It's just like you're just flying around and one day, boom, you're not there. While I'm here, Just work the show. That's, you know, that's my approach to life. Do as much as you can, have as much fun as you can, and little misery as you can, and help as many people as you can, which is the same thing for me as being fun, as fun, having fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Like, so you don't see work as work. You
No, I mean,
right.
I don't know what other people call work anymore,
Right.
because I'm one of these, you know, we sometimes hear people say people have privilege. I am one of the more privileged people I've ever met. I don't know about other people, but there's nothing left on the table for me. You know, I've had so much fun in life that life doesn't owe me anything. So I'm in that unique position. And I don't say that everybody isn't. I know that everybody's not in that position. And so I feel like the only thing I can do now is help other people. There's no more stuff that I need. So there's no reason for me to, quote, work. I'd be miserable. You know, I should do as much as I can, just what I want to do, live cheaply, have fun. And really, most of the money that I spend, it's on other people. You know, it's on doing those other kind of things. But I'm not saying, but that's for me too, because that's why I do it, because it makes me feel good. You know, I mean, it's not altruistic. You know, it's just, I feel better doing it than not doing it. That's why I do it.
Yeah, you want other people to feel how you feel. Like, you know,
not necessarily how I feel, but how they feel. You know, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. You know, if they want to try something, they want to do something, they want to, you know, be someone else. You know, I have different personalities. When I wake up, my different personalities say, "Oh, you should be this guy today." Okay, I'll be you.
Yeah,
you know, be me.
Yeah,
it's my turn. It's my turn to be something. You're supposed to be me today, so I'll do that.
That's cool. Like, this really reminds me of, like, okay, so I try to Google you so much, and then and I talked with like Zach and Laura yesterday. I feel like I found more and more about who you are. Like, but now it makes sense, because you know what you did, it kind of like your belief pieces things together, how you could have such a full life. And then, like, what I really enjoyed this reading, I think you put it online yourself. You said like you were helping a group of troubled teens for a period of time, or like very short period of time, and you made a film about it. And then you mentioned that you feel like the most influential teachers you had who taught you like to teach yourself. And that's why, like, you lean towards helping the student learn through self-discovery, experience, and personal struggle. Like, you wouldn't force them to take your perspective, but you would try to help them to discover themselves. And you also mentioned poetry, because I know poetry is something very special to you throughout your life. So, like, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I found that really meaningful. That's actually, I keep telling my student when I teach them, like, I'm your teacher, but you are your teachers. Like, you know, so that's why I feel like, you know, this part, it really resonates with me, that you know, we are all our own teachers, right?
Right. We come from the inside out. You know, we see things on the outside, but it's all governed by what's on the inside. And so whatever I'm going to share with someone, that's only relevant to them as their protein. You know, it's like protein. When you eat protein, you have to break it down to all the amino acids and then reabsorb it and reconstruct that protein. Otherwise, it's of no use to you, right? And knowledge is in the same vein. It works kind of the same way. My reality doesn't do anything for you. You can take it, but you have to break it down, take the parts that's useful for you, and then rearrange it so that it's meaningful to you. So doesn't make any sense for me, if I'm going to share some information with someone, to make them a clone of my perspective. because it's useless to them. Even if they wanted to do it, they can't. It'll just be something they'll be faking, but they can't make it, you know? So it's important to me that, okay, I bring the resources to you. And if you, you know, like, let's say a technical skill, I'll try to help you and show you from my perspective, but I know that you can't get it until you get the dirt under your fingernails. You know, it's like if I'm teaching someone how to edit a movie or use photo manipulation software or something like that. I can tell them about it, but I can't like just plant the knowledge in their head. Just like nobody could do it for me. I wanted that too. Just make it so, you know, but it doesn't work that way. I have to get in, play with it, and see it from my perspective. So in that sense, that's the way I approach just exchanging information, you know, even whether it's on Facebook or meeting somebody in a coffee shop or making a presentation someplace. The idea is like, look, I'm going to tell you this thing, but if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. You know, it's not about me. It's not about you trying to like get my idea. That's useless to you. And it's useless to me. I don't need you to have my idea. I don't need you to be a clone of me. I don't even want you to be a clone of me. I want to be special. So you just go out and just be you. But I'll give you some information, or I'll point you or show you, share with you something that could be, you might be able to use. And if not, hey,
Right.
just like all the other stuff, just throw it away, man. You know.
Where did you pick up that philosophy? Was that like just self-learned, or did you read it somewhere? Is it?
Okay, so that's kind of like Buddhism 101, really. You know? It's like when the Buddha was teaching, one of the things he said to his disciples is, I'm going to show you this stuff, but if it works for you, and if it works for you, fine, do it. If it don't work for you, don't do it, you know? And I resonated with that. And also just life, really. When I start paying attention to people, especially paying attention to me, I recognize that, you know, look, it doesn't matter how much somebody tells me. It doesn't matter what I get on the test by memorizing what the teacher said. The thing is not a real thing until I have some understanding of how it connects to me. What use is it to me? If I memorize a whole bunch of facts, if I can't use those facts, I just wasted my time. Because it's like having a whole bunch of tools in your shop, but you don't know how to use them. You could have saved your money, because those tools are going to do nothing for you. The tools by themselves don't do anything. What you make, what kind of wood, even, you know, all of those things, and none of those things even do anything for you until you apply them to a project, right? It doesn't become a chair or a table or anything until you imagine that chair or table or whatever your project is, and then you put actual sweat equity into the project. And there are mistakes that happen, and replanning, reshaping, sanding, refining. All of that is part of building the project. That is what I feel like life is doing. So everything I'm doing in life, all those interactions and things I do, they are my teachers. They are the things that actually teach me. You know, my life experiences. I learned from animals. I learned a lot from watching microorganisms, you know, for hours and hours and hours and hours under a microscope, watching their changes and trying to control them, and finally realizing, nah, you can't. You know, they got their own thing and they're the boss in their thing, you know. So all of those things are my teacher. That's how I learned.
You know, racial issue has been a huge part in this country, right? And so like, how do you have any wisdom that, you know, you can advise us, because, you know, you are way older than us.
Hey, what? Oh yeah, I'm probably older than the three of you put together. There's a good chance of that. That's a good chance, you know, because I'm going to guess that most of you are not 35 or older.
I'm approaching.
You're approaching, right? So I think if I added all your ages together, I'm older than all of y'all. So yeah, but I don't, but as a guy who's, you know, we have this, I'm a vinegar consultant, and I remember the thing, a guy, you know, balsamic is this vinegar that's if you make it right, the original, the real way, traditional way, the least time it could possibly take is 12 years. And if you make the extra vecchio, the least time possible is 25 years. So I was talking to one of the guys who make it about that, and he was saying, you know, a lot of people think it's about the aging. He said, but aging vinegar is like people aging. You can be old, you know, it's not just about being old. You could become old and wise, or you could just be an old fool. So just being old is not enough, you know? So if you ask me, well, okay, well, what could I share with you? Again, it may or may not work for you, but my approach is first to understand what's actually happening in the brain all the time. And part of what's happening, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening, but part of what's happening is a lot subconscious. And a lot of people, or what people think is conscious, underneath is all the churnings that are going on that really make the decisions about who they are. So in the case of people getting, let's say, upset, as you mentioned, a lot of times people are already emotional. When I meet that person, one of the things that I understand about them that apparently they don't, is that their amygdala has shut down the prefrontal cortex, which means that they are not capable of having a logical discussion, not because they're bad people or stupid, but because there are hormones that basically shut down or limit, cripple that part of the brain. It's a fight or flight response. So whenever you say something to people that they feel like their tribe is being threatened because that's not the creed of their tribe, and it goes against what they believe or whatever thing they're thinking, and it doesn't matter what that thing is about, then there's a fight or flight thing that kicks in, and then that part of the brain is not the part of the brain that makes logical decisions and logical, you know, calculations. That's really hard for the brain to do at that time. I'm just not saying that loosely. There's actually research where people put people in scanners and stuff like that. It's a very mutually verifiable fact. Let's put it that way. It's not just like, oh, I call this a fact. If you wanted to do the same research, it's been repeated enough times that we can show that people's logical cognitive processes are very much limited by the hormones and the activities of the amygdala. So if I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to make sense of somebody whose prefrontal cortex is limited, how much sense do I make? You know, it's like, well, what's the point of that? Because they can't get it. So my approach is calm that part down first, you know, just say, hey, you know, let's do something else, you know, let's talk about something else, or let's do something together, not talk, because talk is cheap. Talk is just, you know, we can always manipulate. I'm a wordsmith, so I know that you can make words mean what you want, move them around. I mean, that's what we do in poetry. I mean, it's like putting together a puzzle in a way. But when you do something to bond with people, when you try to make it so that they feel connected to you, now they can hear what you're saying, and often you don't have to say it. They'll come to the same conclusion. If you get them to see from your eyeballs. So right now, my approach is, how do I get people to just do something together, right? And we'll notice in the early part of this continent, before this was a country, when Europeans came, people came from all over the world, actually. You know, our history that we learn in high school history, it doesn't show that, but I happen to have done research on um, uh, different ethnic groups, people coming from the migration into America. I did some research for that when I was an investigative reporter, and lo and behold, not only did they come, but there's still evidence all around in plain sight. But people don't talk about that because it complicates the story. It's not an easy story to tell when you think all of these people coming from all these places. A good example is from the earliest European explorers, people were recruiting, let's say, Filipino sailors when they would they'd be in the Philippines, they run out of, there are people dying of scurvy or something, like they need to crew, otherwise they can't get back. They would get Filipinos or whoever would jump on the ship with them, they teach them. And then when they got here, they just dump them off, just like in China. That was the same thing in China when these guys who are like silk merchants, they would come they were slave merchants. They would get to China, realize that they could make more money on the silk than on the slaves. And they would dump all these slaves off in China and take on silk. Now you have the remnants of those people. Their genetics pop up every once in a while in China. And you say, well, how did that guy get here? And you think he is Chinese, but he just had this one of those throwback genes. I know that because from a personal experience of somebody I knew who I thought was Black, but that person was like as Chinese as Mao Zedong, was. And anyway, that's a whole other story. And it's a hilarious story of like a mistake that I made by looking at somebody thinking they're one thing. And in fact, I asked her, I said, she spoke Cantonese. In Cantonese, of course, they have 9 tones. You don't just pop up and learn Cantonese, So I'm thinking, I said, well, how did you learn to speak Cantonese? And she looks at me like, what? I am Cantonese,
Every moment we cross some event horizon, those invisible lines over which, when crossed, an event has happened, though it has not yet happened. At this very moment, some subtle line has been crossed. Some subtle force has pivoted. Some wind has shifted. Some timing adjusted, lining you up with some unseen, unimaginable, inescapable event. When requisite causes converge at the event horizon, free will is mute. Resistance is futile. The effect is already in full effect.
So anyway, but I think it's from the earliest beginning of this country, the way that a certain group of people were able to control the rest was to get them to fight against each other and grind each other and compete with each other and to create buffer zones between them and what they refer to as the mob. They wanted to have complete control, make all the money, get all the resources, because they didn't really believe that anybody else deserved to have anything, because look, these people are stupid and they're just going to ruin everything. They don't even know how to take care of themselves. We have to control them, kind of like cattle, So one of the ways they did that, the primary tool that they did that was to segregate people, to keep them apart, because if they knew each other, they would bond. And then when they did bond, they would not go for the things that those people are trying to push on them. So they purposely made a situation where those people would not know each other. They created lots of things which, if somebody's interested in my segregation 101 class, I'll be happy to send $9.95 and I'll get you the Against You knives too. But if you if you go back and look at history, you'll see that these people purposely set up segregation to keep people apart and to create imaginary lines, because there was no real lines. And the people never, you know, the idea of that people never felt like there were the lines were created. The concept of race is only about 250 years old. Now, a lot of people don't understand that. They think race existed from the beginning. It didn't. In fact, when people were trying to create the idea of race, they didn't know where to make the lines. First, there was like 300 races. Then there was like 30 races. Then they say there was 5. Then they say there was 4. Then they say there were 3. And in this country, we just talk black and white, like that's the only thing. You're on this side or that side, because the people who are on the white side, they're supposed to be special. And then everybody else, well, they might be this or that, but they ain't white, so they're black. You know, so everybody else is this other thing. It's like you either white or you the other, because all we're concerned around is making sure that we're pure and superior. That's all we care about. Anything else is defiling our race. So we don't care what you call yourself, but just for clarity's sake, you're black. You know, so it's one of those kind of things where you think, okay, those are imaginary lines. People just make that up. They just decide. In fact, if you go in this country, you go to one state, you're black. You cross the border, you're not black, because they have this one drop rule. One drop in one case is a quarter. One drop in another case, an eighth. In another case, it's anybody in your ancestor who's not white and you defiled. You know, so you're not perfect. So if nobody knows, even if there is such a thing as race, if nobody can say, what is it that all the people in this race has that no other people in any other race has? If you can't make that distinction, then you have no definition. And so even if there are races, you can't talk about it without understanding, well, what is that definition? Nobody can come up with that definition. And so to me, it's cocktail talk. You know, even if maybe eventually somebody will say, we can, you know, they all have this. But in the meantime, there's this thing called genetics and a genetic code. And the genetic code, they can't find it in the genetic code. They can't find anything in the genetic code that said this person is a black person. They can't say anything. They can say, even those, you know, you have those services that say, oh, you Irish, all poppycock. Because the same thing that they find there, you go in another place like an Australian Aboriginal will have that same code. They say, well, yeah, but we just sort of like leave that off. Well, you can't leave that off because you just said this, anybody who has this is Irish. So this guy, you telling him he's from Irish monarch, but he actually could be from, in some circuitous way, he could come from an Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal, you know, because you don't know where that code came from. The code is the code. So I say that to say that when I'm thinking about these kind of racial issues, I come back to 1, people are tribal. 2, you can't really talk to them about something they don't know about because they're just mouthing stuff, you know? So I don't, you know, even the racists, I just realized, look, those people are also victims of brainwashing. Most of them will not fare well if all those races that they think are the mud people, if all the mud people disappeared, they would disappear real soon. Or they would become the new mud people. Because those same people who are trying to like get you to fight the mud people, they just get you to like, they don't want the mud people to go away because they want you to be fighting each other. If all the mud people suddenly say, okay, cool. We're all gonna just disappear. You have your country. Now those people who are fighting, they will be the new mud people because you're gonna have somebody to deliver, you're gonna have to have somebody to pick up the garbage and that you can look down on, you know? You're gonna have to have somebody to take care of your little snotty-nosed kids when you wanna go to the disco at night or go out with your girlfriends. Somebody's gonna have to be doing that. And if there ain't no mud people to do it, your butt's gonna have to do that, you know? So what they don't realize, I feel sorry for them because they don't realize that they're working against their own interests. You know, they're just being used. They're not, I mean, yeah, they're perps, but they're also victims, and they're victims of their own perpetrator. So I have some sympathy in my heart for them because at least the victims are just victims. It's different than when you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're mostly self-inflicted wounds, but you're still wounded. You're still wounded. So that's how I feel. What would I do about it? I get people together to break the wall of segregation, which is one of the main tools that people use for oppression, is to keep people separated. How do we do that? We just party, find ways to party together, find ways to find friendships and be public and visible about it. Because what you do every time you show up with somebody else who doesn't, quote, look like you, that's not supposed to be in your tribe, every time everyone else sees that, that gives them permission to do the same thing. And a lot of people want to do that. It's just like dogs. We have these dogs broken into breed. That's kind of like what they do with races. None of this is going to be natural. You put the people together, they're going to make babies and it all washes out and everybody's just human. Dogs are the same way. You cannot have breeds of dogs without kennel clubs, because you never see in a pack, you don't see that too much in South Dakota, but I've lived in cities where there's lots of feral dogs. I've never been in a place where all the collies go together, all the German shepherds go together, and all the chihuahuas go together. Dogs don't do that. And that's the same thing will happen to people. You take away the invisible walls, a lot of it is mental and emotional. You take away those walls and people will just get together. It's not gonna happen like overnight, but it'll happen quick. And we see it happening right before our very eyes, despite the pressure to keep it from happening.
Yeah.
People are still getting together.
Right. I just started getting into poetry because of you. but is that, can you tell us a little bit about like how you see poetry as such a special tool?
Okay, so the thing I like about poetry is that it is the most liberated form of literature, at least in the English language. And it's hard to imagine a more liberated one. So what that says, what it means is you don't have to worry about grammar or spelling or anything. What you have to worry about is, did you say something? Now, English teachers will often, it's like hearing someone say that is like fingernails on the blackboard to them, that's like, because they're trying to do the grammar and spelling and making sure. Look, the grammar and spelling is a support mechanism to make the language intelligible to people. If it's not about that function, then it's about some kind of egotistical thing that I know something you don't know, But if the grammar gets in the way of your objective of communicating, then you should throw it out. I don't say don't learn grammar. I don't say don't learn spelling, but I say that communication happens when the grammar is wrong. Communication happens when the spelling is wrong, and I can show you definitive, mutually verifying evidence that that is so. Numerous universities have done various studies, and they have various little gimmicks that they show you to demonstrate that every person has an ability to read a whole bunch of stuff and not even notice that it's misspelled, but they can certainly figure out a lot of the misspelling just because of how the eye works. Therefore, I say spelling is not important. I mean, I don't say that's overstating it. It's not that it's not important. It's not the ultimate important thing. If you spell everything right and get all the grammar right, but don't say what you're trying to say, then to me, that's a failure. If you get all the grammar wrong and no words are spelled right, but the person reading it or hearing it, they understand and they connect with what you say, that's a successful poem. So with that in mind, everybody can write poetry.
Mhm.
Get the idea out there. Now, if we need to clean up the grammar and the spelling, because if that gets in the way, like if you're using a grammar, let's say, for example, you use grammar and people don't know what you're talking about, then maybe you should clean up that grammar. Maybe you need to re-edit the thing and make it, for sure you need to, if your objective is to communicate, you need to fix that, right? But if people get it, good enough, because it doesn't get any better than that. They got the message. The whole point is communication, not some kind of grammatical exercise. It's not about that. It's about communication. If we lose the concept that it's fundamentally about communication, then we're off on a track of just like sort of like making ourselves feel good and feeling like, oh, I'm special and I'm pretty because I have my grammar is so impeccable and look how I did this word and oh, come on. There are important things to say that, and if otherwise, if you're saying something that's not important to me, why should I read it? If I'm saying something that's not important to you and that doesn't add anything to your life, the time you spend doing that is the time you could be doing something else, like pulling your nose hairs or something like that. That means more to you than listening to some poem that I'm saying that doesn't do anything for you.
Right. So you think everybody can be an artist and poet?
Everybody is. Oh, the only thing that happens is that they sometimes, the permission for them to create is taken away.
Mm-hmm.
You give a kid a piece of paper and a pencil and they become instant Picassos, But then one of the things that you will do, one of the things that will happen is they say, oh, he should take an art class. And then suddenly that kid starts like copying the masters. Well, you got photocopy machines that do that now. You don't need a kid to do that. He doesn't have to, let the kid, show him some more tools, give him some new paint, show him some new things. If he asks, well, how do I move my hand this way? Can you give me some advice? Or if you see that he's in a bad position, awkward position, then you can say, hey, try sitting up this way and just tell me how it feels. Tell me how it feels. Tell me, and then look at, draw something this way. Or you have this red. What are you trying to express? Can you tell me what you're trying to express? Suppose you use a blue in that spot, or suppose with the red, you shaded it with blue. What do you think will happen then? Let the kid discover for themselves. And then big kids or little kids, let people discover. That's why I feel like if I'm dealing with, let's say, that racial things, that the important thing is to get people together and to show people that you will walk across those lines. That is my life mission. And most of my life, I did it without that even, let's say, awareness that that's what I was doing. But in fact, all my life, I've been doing that. I've been walking back and forth across the line that people said that you can't go across.
Right.
Before I went to Korea, the State Department and people were saying, oh, you don't really want that assignment in Korea because Koreans don't like Black people, and they especially don't like people with beards and stuff. And so they kept telling me that so much. I said, wait. If Korea is more racist than America, I want to go just to see how it feels. I just want to see how that worked, because I can't imagine anybody more racist than this country. But so I got there, it was nothing like that. People were like standing outside the State Department building on the weekend to pick me up, to take me for a weekend. I go someplace, people ask me to hold their baby and take a picture of me and their baby and their wife. It's like I said, well, if this is like racial prejudice, let's take some of that back to America. Let me get some. Let's get us some of that. Let's get some of this Korean style racism segregation. I want some of that in America. Bring that to Alabama.
Their racism got soul, like soul.
Exactly. And it's super bad.
Your poem, Blue Foggy Day.
Yeah.
The visuals to that. Can you talk to that?
Well, I'm actually glad you chose that particular one because it has a very, what I think, inside I chuckle at that one. And in fact, I was kind of chuckling all the way in doing it. Okay, so I was driving back home, I think from Sioux Falls or something. Anyway, I'm driving back home. And then suddenly, and I got to around Wa Bay, and it was like, really foggy. And it's been flooding in that lake for a while. They've had to build up the streets and everything. Anyway, it was flooding. And there was, it was foggy. It was really foggy. And I thought, okay, I should this is really kind of ghostly and stuff like that. So this is like a nice picture. And besides, it's kind of hard to drive. So I pulled to the side of the road and I took a whole series of shots of, and like I zoomed in, zoomed out. And in photography, we call it working the shot. You shoot it from all different kind of angles, get in the street. And so I took a whole bunch of shots, but what I didn't do, but what I forgot to do was turn on the white balance, so in the camera, you have to, you have to adjust for where's the white. And I didn't adjust for the white balance, so all of it was blue because I didn't change the white balance. So when I looked at them, I said, well, yeah, it's blue, but wow, that's cool. So it was an accident to get them blue. If I had done it right, I never would have made that film because the blueness wouldn't have stuck out. Mm-hmm. So once I had this series and I decided, I didn't take a movie, but this isn't really a movie kind of thing. Because the fog is still, it's not moving. There's nothing. You don't want anything moving. That would like destroy the whole sense of the thing. So I said, okay, well, this is like I call them slideios. It's like you just make a movie from the slides. So then I had to make an audio track with it that depicted or like accentuated that sense of mystery, and so that's how that came together,
Yeah, I was
so it's just a matter of like, how do you, where does the, what kind of music, what kind of sounds, what kind of effects can you use to like really bring out the mystery in that and make it mysterious?
I was just wondering about your music, how you came up with it, and
Oh, how did the music come together?
Yeah, how did the music come about? Yeah.
Okay, so there are certain kinds of instruments and certain ways to approach music and certain chord structures and chord progressions that can reliably elicit certain kinds of feelings. Okay, so that's what we do in sound design. Okay, and then a lot of it though is the instruments, that kind of like natural but unnatural sound, that kind of whiny, because the fog makes it kind of hard to see, so everything slows down because your brain has to like put a lot of putty in the holes, so to speak. In other words, you see a little bit, but the brain has to like try to figure out, well, what is this? You're seeing it through this smoke, and is that a house? And what is that form? Or did I see the tree branch goes that way? It's not consciously necessarily that you're thinking of that, But in order for the brain to construct what you or we recognize as an image, the brain has to do a lot of construction. And what you see is most likely not really what's there. The brain has to put all of that together. So those kind of sounds my intention anyway, is to give the brain kind of permission to struggle with that, you know, and then the clanging of the cymbals is sort of like, wake up, you know, it's the fog, you know? But it's so, and it's also, there's a lot of experimentation, you know. The baby wasn't born fully, you know, bearded or anything, you know. It had, there was a lot of iteration, and take that out. It's a lot of layering involved. And so you just, nah, that's too much, or that's not enough. And if I go back and look at the, you know, the original score again, and put me in a room by myself, I'll probably do it completely different, because it was sort of like you're there, you're doing it intuitively, thinking, oh, I need one of those. I put one of those in here. I need to repeat that and put this back in. And that's the kind of musician I am. I can't do like live stuff because I'm 4 or 5 measures behind or ahead, but I'm never at the measure that I'm supposed to be. So I can't play live. So I don't try, because I'm always rearranging in my head. And that's just how I do it. I'm always that's how I look at life. I'm always, when I meet people, I'm always reconfiguring them moment by moment in my mind. One, because I know that in real life, they are also reconfiguring.
Right.
You know, everybody is, moment by moment, we're changing. Right. We're different people, moment by moment. So the people who started this video, they don't exist anymore. You know? This is our video now.
That's very true. Yeah, we are changing any minute, right? Any second.
Every minute. That's right. That's right. And there's nothing we can do about it. We can't say, oh, I'm never going to change. Good luck with that.
Yeah. I just get this meditative, like your self-reflective vibe when I watch your videos. Is that like an intentional
it's absolutely intentional
effort?
That's,
okay.
Yeah. Because I don't feel like, I may say something, and in some of my poems, for example, they may, at least on the surface, appear to be telling people a thing. But my real intention is to have people tell themselves a thing. It's really about the inner reflection. So maybe at most I can say I intend to prompt, to prod, to stimulate, on very different emotional levels, not what to think or what to feel, but to think and to feel. And given new information, a functioning brain will recalculate and see a different thing. You know, it may or may not be what I saw, likely not what I saw, because it's also part of who they are and what they see, you know, and doesn't need to be what I saw, or what, you know, who I am. I don't need a clone. I'm perfectly fine being special, you know. But on the other hand, if people don't have certain kind of information, and if they lack a certain perspective, they are cheated out of understanding their own mind. You know, to the extent that I don't understand your mind, or something that you experience, or something that you know, is this extent to which I have a deficit in the way I think. You know, now I can't know everybody's thinking. I can't see through everybody's eyes, because there's 7.5 billion people around. Right. So, you know, but I can, when I can try to see through your eyes. I can try to see. I don't have to see everything, but any little thing will help me to build a more 3-dimensional, even 4-dimensional construct of the universe that I live in, because I only have 2 eyes. You know, I'm only walking around behind those 2 eyes, you know.
Yeah.
I cannot have enough experiences to give me an accurate, anything close to an accurate assessment of the universe that I'm living in. I need other people's ideas. So I figure, well, if I'm going to take other people's ideas, I should also be willing to share them. And if I'm not, then
Yeah.
what does that say about me? You know?
Yeah. You know, it's like we are all learning from each other's experiences, right? Points of view.
Yes.
And then after we experience that, our worldview is different. We can share that
Yes.
with more people, right?
Exactly. And it is incorporating all of those different views, you know, and not just cultural views in the sense of like ethnicities and countries and religions. I mean, even things like if a guy's a wood carver, the fact that that person carves wood gives them an intimate approach and view of life from a whole different perspective that people who don't carve wood don't have. You know, people who work with wood, or maybe a better example, people who work with clay, they will tend to develop patience, or they will give up clay, because clay doesn't, you think you're molding the clay, one of the first things you learn as a potter is that clay molds you. You know, in fact, there are some, porcelain is a classic example. Porcelain has a memory. And when you do something with porcelain, and unless you cast porcelain, it's very unlikely that you will get, let's say, a perfectly round bowl by turning porcelain on a wheel. There are some clays you can get pretty close, but they all, under observation, they all sort of move, right? In some cases, they even break 6 months later. They spontaneously break. They have, you know, so I say that to say, it's not just about the quote ethnic cultures. Right. It's about like getting out of, like, if you're in chemistry, go over to the biology department, for Pete's sake. If you play violin, go hang out with the flute player, you know? I learned a lot in clay making. I have a lot of skills in playmaking that I got from making bread. You know, the approach to making bread. In fact, I have almost a double set of tools in my my clay workshop as I have in my kitchen for baking. You know, because I learned so much. My approach is very much guided by my approach to baking bread. So that's to say that our biggest problem as human beings is we're culturally imprisoned. And if we if we escape the cultural imprisonment and go learn everything we can, meet different people and stuff like that, we will find that the world is not nearly as limited as we thought. And we'll find that we have more friends than we thought. You're going to say something, Zach.
Speaking of prison, the inmate art, it's a good transition there. What got you started in that, and what have you learned from the inmates?
All those guys have stories. You know, people making movies, they have to go out and get people to imagine something and then write it in and create a story. These guys have stories. They have real stories that are usually more interesting than the stories that people make up. And they are often as hard to believe. You have to like suspend disbelief, but there's evidence that they, you know, that's in their police report, you know. So I'm saying that you know, all of these guys have stories, or most of them, they have stories that are very interesting. Now the question is, how does somebody like that have an opportunity to share those stories with other people? That's where the art comes in. That's where the whole point of, like, after talking with these guys, well, one of the first things I did, I'm the Buddhist chaplain. I'm a monk, technically. And so I'm the Buddhist chaplain in the prison. And one of the conditions that I decided to do that on was I can't just be the guy in here for the Buddhists. Buddhists don't do that, and especially a monk can't do that. So if I'm here for anybody who feels like I might be useful. So I asked the guys, what is it that you need in here? And one of the things they said, well, we don't have a way to like get better art training, or we don't have a way to do anything with the art, or we don't, and then the poetry came, that was like part of the same thing, because I started the poetry thing as a way to get people to find a way that they can express themselves. And as I mentioned before, don't worry about the grammar when you come in here. Somebody else, some other teacher might say, hey, you need to get your grammar straight up. That's not happening here, man. Tell me what you feel. Use the words that make sense to you, with the understanding that if the other person doesn't understand what you mean by that word, or if you turn people off by, this obscene word, then you may lose that person. But maybe you're not talking to that person. Maybe the person you're talking to is a person who that resonates with them, and they know what that word means, not necessarily literally, but emotionally. That has a meaning for them. And without that, that poem doesn't make it's not as impactful, let's put it that way. So that was, like trying to find a way first for guys to express themselves was the core reason to have a poetry group, and especially when there are guys who are trying to write, but they're in different tiers, they're in different, they don't know each other, and okay, well, let's make a place where these guys can meet legitimately in the prison. So became that. Now, once these guys started to get together, one of the reasons, one of the things I recognized is that they, like most of the inmates, have poor or low self-esteem. So my solution to that was to create a book for them. And by the way, I just got the manuscript for the third Pros and Cons, which is the book that they put out. They put 2 out already. The whole point of that book is not to have a million seller or make $1 million, because they don't even get the money. The money goes to Family Connection, okay? The objective of the book is a guy who's now in prison and he's got kids. He can give his kid a copy of that book, and the kid can say, my daddy is a published poet. He may be a dope dealer, a bank robber, a pimp, or whatever, and he may be a con, but I can think of him as a published poet. That means a lot to a guy.
Right.
Especially a guy who's gotten no recognition for anything except something he did that's untoward. So to me, that is the purpose of art. That is the point of doing all human activity, is for us to support each other and give each other a stage to exchange an idea. And the poems, I get feedback from people. They ask me to come and read. They'd like the inmates to come and read, but you could see the challenges to that. But people want to know, and people have been moved by the poems. One guy I know, he sent the copy to his mother, and his mother was like flabbergasted. She bought a whole bunch of copies to give to her friends, right? So all of her church buddies got a copy of that. My son is something else. My son is a published poet. And that mother being able to say that to her friends, that is worth it to me. That's worth all the drives to Sioux Falls, for that mother to be able to say, my son is something more than a con. So that's the work that, I mean, I don't really call it work, but as that's to loosely put, that's what I do in the prison. That's the point of doing it, is to help other people to find their voice, whether it's in poetry or art or whatever you do, man, bring it, and share it with people. connect yourself with the rest of humanity, because it is the disconnection from humanity that causes people to be criminal. If I connect with your humanity as a human being, I cannot bump you over the head to take your tennis shoes. You know, I cannot shoot you to take your jacket, especially not a jacket got a damn bullet hole in it. You know, so you can't, you know, I can't do that to you if I connect with you as a human being. It's only when I can dehumanize you as some kind of object, you know, that's how I can do that. Again, that's why I say we have to find ways to connect, because the more we connect, the more it's difficult for people when they accept you as a human being, or even when they're forced to, it's harder for them to do you wrong, because there's that connection, and there's this thing called, you know, a mirror neuron, you know, okay, another technical term, but we have a thing in our brain, a loop in our brain, that when I see another human being do something, I understand it. My brain understands it from the perspective of me doing the thing. Okay, that's a function in the brain, to the point that people actually use it to help athletes, professional athletes, heal faster, because their neural system, that thing that, you know, that hooks up our brain, all the neurons and stuff, all of the nervous system, that's what the word I was looking for. Our nervous system has a pattern, and it fires in that pattern when it sees somebody else is doing it. So I'm just saying, like, when we connect with each other and we do things and we share stuff, we exchange a little bit of ourselves each time we do that. Each time we have an interaction, even if it's a fight, you know, the fact that we interact, you know, it's like brothers and sisters fight a lot. They might fight, but don't get between them. You know, if you get between them, you know, or husband and wife, they may fight and be ready to kill each other, but when the police come, they're just likely to turn on the police. You know.
So you think it's important to make more opportunities for people who feel they don't have a voice in this society right now, to connect, right? Like create more opportunities for them.
Exactly. And the idea that you have to play at Carnegie Hall is complete poppycock. You know, play in your living room, get people together in your living room. People say, well, we don't have no place, we don't have a venue. You got a 1-bedroom apartment, don't you? How many people can you get in that 1-bedroom apartment? Probably 20, right? That's about as many people as you're gonna get, you know, in a coffee house, you know? So why do you have to have the coffee house? Have it in your living room. And if you have some tuna fish sandwich, potato chips and Kool-Aid, you got a party, you know? I've had lots of parties like that, but we didn't have a lot. But everybody, you bring some tuna, you bring a loaf of bread, you bring some potato chips, I got some mayonnaise, and, you know, and then for the wild parties, this guy, he got a fifth of vodka. We pour that in the Kool-Aid, we got it going on. You know, it's like, it's a party, you know, and everybody got a record, even if it's scratchy, you know? So what I'm saying is, like, we can always have a party. We can always find a reason. If you got poetry, even if you go to a park, you know, go to a park, stand on a damn table, and then say your poetry, you know, do your poetry, make it happen. Don't let money and all these venues and all those things, find ways to connect, find ways to bring art to people, find ways to get art in front of people and exchange the art, you know, so that people, you know, like a lot of times, like the big things, like let's say an orchestra, they often say, oh, we don't have a lot of people don't come to our concert. That's because you haven't trained an audience. You know, when you start training an audience, when you start playing at every place you can find, people suddenly hear a violin or a viola. They never heard that before. They never heard that kind of, you know, thing. Go play in the park. Just stand in the park and start playing. Who's going to arrest you for playing a violin in the park? Nobody. you know.
So you have a very freeing mindset. Like you're not shackled by the constraints of what society say you can or can't do, or the assumption that society say you can or can't do. Like you got to have the Carnegie Hall venues and all these things. Where did that mindset, that cultural, or is it just your own thing? Like, I guess, is this something that your family does? Is this just something uniquely you? Where are you from? Like, what planet do you come from? No, I'm just
okay.
But
Okay, so I grew up in San Francisco, and that mindset came from living it, you know. Okay, so I lived about 2 blocks from the Golden Gate Park, the Panhandle we call it. Okay, so in the Panhandle on any Saturday or Sunday morning, there would be some guys who would be out playing congas, right? Well, pretty soon, some guys would come with a guitar and just sort of strum the guitar as a percussion instrument, along with the guys who were playing congas. Wasn't long before somebody showed up with a sax. Wasn't long before somebody showed up with a bass. And people, when I say drums, okay, I said congas, but sometimes it was like boxes, you know, a cardboard box. Sometimes it was just like a stick and a coffee can. And they made some hella music, right? Well, this thing in the park, pretty soon, when you got guys that's jamming, people who weren't even playing, they would be jogging. They stop and listen. Then pretty soon, they say, well, what time you gonna meet, man? Let's do this again. Pretty soon it became a standard time where everybody showed up and they start playing. Wasn't long before there was so many people that somebody got the idea we should like get a little platform, man. We got all these people here, you know, like, and it was like a free thing. You showed up, you jammed, you sang, and it wasn't just there. Once something was happening there, maybe they got it from someplace else, but I live near the park, so that's how I experienced it, is starting there. But you could go out to the beach or something like that, and there'll be guys out there playing. But at any rate, pretty soon this whole thing grew into what the 60s knew as the, quote, flower children, and all of that music that people were doing. That started in the park with people just jamming. And people did that for a couple of years before it was like a huge thing. And then this guy, Bill Graham, who was a mime guy, he was like, you know, like, and they would do stuff miming in the park, but this guy was very entrepreneurial. And so he realizes, look, if you got all of these people and they come out and you got people who play it free, because by this time it had grown to the point that people were actually getting building a stage, getting a permit, building a stage, bringing instruments, and people were donating. Like a band would say, well, you know, they play, and they say, really, nobody knows our band, but there's a whole bunch of people out there, man. We should like go out there and play, because we want an audience as much as we want somebody to pay us. And they start doing that, and then to finance the thing, they just passed the hat. They got more money passing the hat than people often get when they're playing the gig. And then the thing became to like, well, we got way more money, man, than we deserve for just sort of showing up on the weekend and just sort of jamming. And then everybody's playing, so how do you even split the money? So they decided to give the money to the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic and some other kind of things that was helping everybody, right? So I grew up, you know, as a high school kid and fresh out of high school, I grew up with people doing that, and that was just a way of life, you know? There was like people like, and the idea of like the Kool-Aid and the stuff, we had something called rent parties, okay? A guy can't pay his rent, he's short on money for rent, he gets some Kool-Aid, potato chips and stuff, and he say, hey, I'm gonna have a party, I can't pay my rent, could you guys like chip in something to help me pay my rent? People throw in $5, $10 or something like that. They couldn't get away with that in the club, right? They never go to have as good a time as you're gonna have at this guy's house for $5. In fact, they couldn't even get in the club for $5, and then they still got drinks that they have to buy, you know, 2-3 drink minimum, right? So I grew up with people finding alternative ways to put art out, you know. Graffiti is, is one of those things. Guy wants to put his billboard up too. Why is it only Procter and Gamble can do graffiti? You know, why can't everybody do graffiti? So I kind of grew up in that.
How you grew up and all those experiences kind of led to this, you know, freeing your mind kind of concept that anything's possible, right? Like you just gotta try it, and then you know you are not scared of failures. You just go for it, and then you know figure it out after you know.
I would say there are no failures, even if when they feel like failures at the time, there aren't really any failures. Especially, you know, it's kind of like the Blue Foggy day thing. I could have caught that as, oh my, this is off, but no, this is a thing, you know. Okay. So what is, you know, there's always more film on the floor than there is on the screen, you know, when you're taking a movie. Right. But you can take all of that film on the floor and re-edit it and make another movie. Right. You know, it's never wasted. It's just a matter of, well, what do you want to create? Mm-hmm. And found object art to me is like some of the most intriguing art. People always have stuff to make art. Mm-hmm. People always, if you have an idea, even if you don't, just start putting stuff together and stand back and look at it. Look at it from different angles. Look at it from the top, the side, you know. Go to the beach or to a lakeside and just start stacking rocks. You don't have to glue them together. They don't have to be, you know, make a sandcastle, you know. Go out in your backyard or, you know, or find stuff. Like go down the street and pick up the first 10 things that's over 6 inches long and then take it back home and see what you can make out of it. Right. You know, it's not the art you make, it's the you that the art makes. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the process of doing the thing. That is the artwork is happening inside you. The thing that you know, the piece of music that you make and all of that, that's not the thing. The thing is how your brain changes as a result of struggling with that thing. Mm-hmm. It's how other people's brain change as a result of seeing what you are feeling or hearing what you did. That's the art, really.
Earlier, you talked about segregation, been to Asia, like different Asian countries, and your experience out there. You're a Buddhist. Do you know what is your ancestry, and do your ancestry influence any of your art?
I have a lot of ancestry, so it always depends on you know, where I want to start from. And you know, I can say that, and I should say that not just Asia, but I spent 2.5 years in Africa too. I worked and lived there. I worked in radio in Europe. And I spent quite a bit of time in South and Central America, you know. So all of those things play a lot into who I am. As far as my ancestry, like I say, it comes from a lot of different angles. I'll give you an example. My sister, older sister, she was sick. Well, she still is sick, but she, you know, she had this illness that really dogged her for a long time. And she went to this one doctor and he had all her medical records. This big, thick thing. She was telling me, he has this whole big dossier on me. And he said, you know, I've been like looking through your medical records here, trying to figure out what it might be. And the only thing that I can come up with, it can't be you because it is a disease that only Native Americans get, you know? Well, that's because he was looking at her and saying, well, that's your ancestry, right? That's one of those kind of weird things about race. It's like you look at a person, you think that's what they are. That may not be who they are, you know? Then, so if you look at my ancestry, I can remember as a kid, my great-grandmother was a full-blood Native. In fact, the only thing I can remember about her was she was blind And we used to sit in the dark and comb her hair. And we like to do that as kids because the sparks would fly when you comb her hair because of, just that was her hair. You know what I mean? So if you, on either side of my family, you have like a bunch of Native people. We don't do a whole thing. In fact, we don't do a whole thing about being Native. In fact, my family, my grandmother was there. My great grandmother was there because my father was embarrassed by her. I mean, not my father, my grandfather was embarrassed by his mother. He wasn't into being Native. It wasn't a thing. And our family didn't make a thing about it, So who is my ancestors? Which line do I want to follow? And even those people who came from Africa, they often came from different places. And those slavers, they mixed people like whatever they want. They didn't have any ideas for like keeping all these people from the Suguga tribe over here and all the Bumba tribe over here. So Africa is a continent. It ain't a country. It ain't a tribe. It's not homogeneous. It's a continent, for Pete's sake. So if someone says I have African descent, that means nothing to me because I've lived in Africa and I know that these people on this side of the river feel that they're as different from the people on the other side of the river as people feel that they are from people who are Chinese or French. In fact, some cases, that's why they were successful. That's why Europeans were successful at conquering those people because they felt they were at war with each other. They could never have done what they did to Africa without the consent of Africans who were fighting among themselves and didn't see that they had a collective interest because they saw those guys as a different. So when I look on this side and I say, well, which one of those people am I going to trace myself back to and why? Why do I trace back to that line? It's just like when I confront people who say, well, I'm Norwegian. You say, well, why did you stop in Norway? Nobody auto-generated in Norway. People didn't start out. There was no Norway. Norway is a pretty young country. Germany is a younger country than the United States. There was no Germany at the time the United States formed. There was no Germany. But people say, well, I'm German. Well, you didn't auto-germinate in Germany. Why did you stop there? And most of you came from Russia, from Germany to Russia to here. So why don't you say you're Russian American, right? Well, why don't you go all the way back and you're African American because you all started there, So that's why I say everybody in Roslyn is African American.
That's true. I learned about that in my history class in elementary school.
Oh yeah, there you go. We need that class.
Okay.
But I'm saying like, so if I tried to find out where my ancestors come from, I wouldn't know how to even go about that because I don't think that there is any. If I would just say, well, where is my great grandfather, grandfather, and people like that, I don't know. I wouldn't know where to start. And the earliest I could start was when the Mormons start, or the latest, furthest I could go back was when the Mormons start taking records, because other than that, there's no accurate records. So everything else is going to be like those people who pay their money to get their ancestral records. It's just going to be something for my ego trip, I don't have that kind of ego, and the other thing is, a human being is not just their genetics. Even geneticists will tell you that your genetics is made up of not only that DNA, but how the DNA interacts with the environment. That is the whole point of Darwin, is that your DNA interacts with the environment, and that determines what the whole organism is. You put that same organism in another environment, it's a different thing, right? We can't control the DNA, but we can, to some extent, control the environment. And so it's like, to me, Zach, your ancestors play as much a part in who I am as my direct, the ones at least I can find that they do. The same with Yi Chen. I may not know your relatives, but there's a reasonable chance that one of them help make this iPad that this computer that I have. And another one made a light bulb, and another one made this keyboard, and another one made my shirt. You know what I mean? So how can I say that the people, and then there's all their ancestors that made who they were. So how can I say I'm disconnected from your ancestors?
Right.
So
yeah.
I'm not a very good romanticist. I don't.
Yeah, you're a scientist.
Yeah. So romantics, that's for violin players.
Oh, okay. Really? Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a place for romantics. I don't say it's less than I am. It's just like, that's not how I roll. I have limited talent in that area. So I don't do that much, If something is meaningful and it's a useful tool, even to elicit an emotion, then you have my attention. If it's just like a story that I make to make myself feel good or to impress some other people who I usually don't care what they think, then I'm too lazy, just to put it out there. I'm too lazy to waste effort on things that I really can't see how it benefits me or anybody else,
Right.
So I don't do, I won't say I don't do it. I couldn't say I don't do it ever. I would just say I don't wake up in the morning with a overriding interest in doing, and shaping myself so other people will say, "Oh, Diggs is this," I don't even know those people. Why do I care?
Right. You're just you. Like you embrace. Embrace yourself. But it's interesting that I think everybody sometimes we forget that all our experiences form who we are, right? As we go. So I think we all cling on to our cultural. That's why culture becomes the big thing, or your ethnicity, right? Because we cling on. Those are easy things for us to cling on. It's almost like a lifestyle, basically. This is how you live, and you are proud of being in that kind of environment, how to live. But a lot of time, we should turn those into how we share those experiences with other people, so that can become a little bit of experiences. And eventually, it's like the whole world. We are big family, right? I'm sure we all relate to each other in one way or another. In Taiwan, I probably told you guys, Japanese conquered us, Portuguese, Spanish, there's so many people who came to this little island. I feel like there must be a lot of different genetics, in my bloodline that I don't know about. We are all a part of each other's lives. And how can we make this world better by trying to open our mind to understand their lives and share each other's experiences more and figure out ways to help each other? Because probably some people will ask you, if I feel like I'm so content with my life, and why do I need to help those people who think they are minorities, right?
Well, the thing is, it's easy for us because we have limited processing power. No matter how smart we think we actually are, we have very limited processing power. When we really stop to think how much there is to know, we know very little of it. And that's amplified in terms of human experiences. And I find great value in sharing other people's experience. And one way to do that is through the arts. And the artist community has a great opportunity to be inclusive because they don't have to have a union meaning like some kind of enclosed group that only sees things from, unions are much better now than they used to be, but they used to be kind of ethnic, but we don't have to, because they were come from guilds, the idea of guilds, and everybody in that guild kind of knew each other, and they might have been even related, like all the Smiths, all their sons, that's what they could be. That's a place they knew they could find work. But you kept your secrets because that made you more powerful. And all of those lords and armies and stuff, they weren't going to mess with you if you were the blacksmith, because without you, they would have no spear tips. They're not going to make those guys mad, because then they could like slow down production on metal spears, So, but now as artists, we can be inclusive of a lot of people, and we should be. And we should take the opportunity to lead by example, lead by inviting people from all these different groups to come in and do something. Even like little kids, do something with the kids who are the people, even the people who are the racists, co-opt their kids, be the Pied Piper by just bringing that little racist kid in and help them to have another experience other than the one that they get through watching Fox News, or their parents watching Fox News. And I'll give you an example of how some people recognize this. When I was in Japan, these people who were like the high priest in this Shinto religion, they hired me to come and teach their grandkids and their and some friends of theirs who, are members of their temple. They got a group of kids together and they asked me to come and teach them English. And they said, they were very upfront in saying that, look, these kids are really young and we don't know how much English you can actually teach them. But just so you know, that isn't our real purpose. Our real purpose is we want them to be able to shake hands with someone who looks like you without them getting sweaty palms. We want them to feel comfortable with you with the hope that when they meet another Black person, they will feel comfortable with them because they have a way to think about them. And we know you from, your activities in the community and the things you do and what people say about you in the community, and the fact that you live in the Buddhist temple, and are very closely connected with them. We feel like of all the people we know, you could be the one that could, could impart that feeling to these kids. I respected that. And I think that was a good lesson for me in the sense of like somebody else recognized that it's really about the experience of getting to know each other. Just getting to have that time where you know how this person smells, and I got pictures to show you the interactions with those kids, right? And we have, I go back years later and they're all grown up now. Some of them have their own kids, So it's like making those kind of relationships, I don't know if I sent you my book, Allies, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see in that book, all those different kind of relations from all these different people in the world. That's what I mean by walking across these invisible lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think art is uniquely positioned to create events, things where everybody's welcome. Create parties, create what in San Francisco we call them be-ins, be-ins, where you just be who you are and you show up at the park and then spontaneous parties happen, I think we have the power to do that, and just invite people that and then any people who going around, who walk up on you, just say, hey, you're invited too. Come on, we got more Kool-Aid. We ran out of vodka, but we still got Kool-Aid.
We want to be more inclusive. I think that's like easy thing to do. Just say hello. You want to join us, right?
Exactly. Or just in the grocery store, or some other activity that you're doing. You see those people. And you just say, hey, like, how are you doing? Like, that's a nice shirt you got on, or, And also allowing people to experience us at their own level and then bring them in, you know, getting people to see us as humans as opposed to a stick figure or a representative of something that, you know, who knows what's in their mind. So to that end, I'm actually working on a program. I don't know where it's going to go because we need some more players. But let's say like the chief of police in Aberdeen, he and I are working on a project right now to get the cops and the college students who come from other places, you know, but because they're not from here, you know, all those people who are out, to get them together with the police, not as police, but as people, you know. Don't wear the uniform. They don't need to wear their football uniform. You don't need to wear your cop uniform. We just get together as people. And we don't even have to talk about, quote, our differences and all of that. Let's get together and do a project. Let's get together and have a little party. And we don't even have to discuss that I'm a cop.
Right.
It's known, it's not a secret.
Yeah.
But the point is not to know me as a cop, but to know me as a person. And for me to know you as a person, not as the quote college student, and have this kind of like image of what you're supposed to be, or based on how you look, or the fact that you go to school, or the fact that you're a football player, or the fact that I'm scared of you because you're built better than I am, and you know look like you could take me down. You know, get to know that guy and do some projects together, right? So I'm just saying, like, art is a perfect thing where artists, you don't need a whole bunch of people to do it.
Right.
You know, you just need, you don't have, in fact, just do it yourself. If you do it with one person, that's one less person who are on the other side.
That's awesome. Yeah, so before, yes.
Jack had his microphone off, so I wanted to, I know he's the silent type, so I wanted to give him a chance if he had a question.
Yeah, Jack.
The forms of art that you choose to express, to use your voice, what like, how did you get started? Was it like in elementary, high school, or like why did you get started in art, and what was the first forms of art that you kind of gravitated toward it and said, like, this is the form that I'm going to continue on in my career?
I never did that. You know, I approached art in a non-artistic way. I'm not one of the people, for example, who separate art and science. You know, to me, art, I kind of view art like people did in the area I was living in Africa. They didn't have any art on their walls, but almost everything that they used, there was some art on it. You know, so it's integrated into their whole lifestyle. It's about all kinds of things, not just religious symbols, but what does this symbol make me feel? How does it add to my day? Or is it whimsical? Or it's just, you know, like just something, just, you know, like henna, you know, like you just paint these designs, but then pretty soon they fade off, and you then come back with some more henna and do another design. So it's, or graffiti, you know. So I guess, you know, my approach right now, just to fast forward, my approach right now is I see art as a process more than the product. I'm much more interested in how these things work and understanding the materials and how the materials change me than I am in how I change the materials, right? So I'm not so interested in the fact that there is a bowl at the end of working on some ceramics. I'm much more interested in how making the bowl makes me feel, or what I learned that can't be said in words from messing with the clay and struggling with the clay, and all of those little internal struggles that go on when you spend a lot of time forming something and it turns out completely different or breaks in the kiln, right? Those are opportunities for me to deal with the fact that I'm clinging to that bowl, or I'm clinging clinging to the work that goes into that bowl. And it gives me an opportunity to let that go. And the more I practice letting that go, the more I'm free to like make mistakes, to do things. The more I'm free to interact with people and not expect it to necessarily go really good, you know? That's not important. The interaction is important. I'm gonna come away learning something, even if the other person doesn't, you know? So my approach to art is the earliest thing that I think you could call as an art form was photography, because I started shooting pictures for the school newspaper, but my father was a professional photographer. And so he showed me like different things that, you know, like stuff that he could never do meaning that he was trying to make money at it. So he was limited, but he knew those things could be done. And he got a kick out of telling his kid that, hey, you should try that, you know? And so I was doing things that at the time I didn't know how special they were until 30 or 40 years later. And I realized that some people were quite famous for doing 10 years after my father had showed me. They became famous for doing something they had showed me 10 years before, you know, how to do in the dark room, you know? He gave me like a whole way to like look at photography, you know, that wasn't the quote, he gave me an artistic eye for photography, whereas I really came from, I had come at it from a documentary perspective, but he didn't really like sit down and quote, teach me. We didn't have a class, but I would be happy to show him what I was doing, and he would give me pointers, as would the people we had the city park system had a photo lab that you would pay $35 a month, get that. And we'd have complete access to a dark room. But the real beauty wasn't the equipment. The real beauty was that there was all these old geezers in there who would always help you if you had any kind of problem with, you know, or they would always say, you should try this on this kind of paper. Here's a sheet, go develop that on this paper and see how that will look, you know? Those kind of things gave me this whole freedom about, and living with a lot of artists, I was trying all kinds of stuff right out of high school, everything from doing wax art to paint to jewelry, of course, photography, building things, electronic stuff, and of course, music, because I was in radio, you know, and surrounded by musicians because it was a top 40 radio stations and #1 station. So all of these people who were like musicians, you know, top 40 musicians, chart musicians, they were people you sat down and had to drink with. People like Bill Cosby, Flip Wilson, and people, we sat and drank with them up on the Strip, you know, up on Broadway. So I'm just a little, basically like right out of high school, 19, 20 years old. And with all of these guys who are like, you know, and hearing their stories and hearing how they put things together, all of that, that's why I say I'm a privileged person. Most people don't get that. Most people don't have that input. That's why it's necessary for me now to give back when people want it. You know, I'm not here to like force whatever I have on other people, but I feel like I should make that available in case people want it. And then just say, I don't have an answer, but I can point to where there might be an Easter egg for you. Zach, you said you had one last question or something you were going to say, sounded like.
You answered it. You just finished answering it.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
And Laura, you didn't say anything.
I did.
Are you just there to like decorate the screen?
I am. No, it was all great, and I didn't want to interrupt anything, and I love it all. So I'm sorry I was so quiet.
She's an observer. Like she's quite quietly judging us. Just
Yeah,
like,
that's good.
I thought it was great. You covered everything and kind of like Zach, when anytime I had a question, you kind of just went into it anyway. So.
I want to share your beautiful Japanese poem, Kage Wa Mu. at the end of this video. So is there anything special? Because I was actually gonna ask you about like language, because you did like, you know, Lakota language workshops, right? And yeah, there's, so I was, if you have anything to share specifically about this poem, Kage Wa Mu, or like, you know, what inspiring thing you found just by exploring different languages?
Yeah,
In poem.
poetry lends itself to lots of languages. Many languages have poetry traditions. As far as anyone has been able to show me, Lakota language doesn't have a poetic tradition. I would like to see that change because they're trying to bring the language more into common use. I think languages are living, and so at one time there was no English poetry. At one time there was no French poetry. At one time there was no, you know, Japanese poetry. But somebody started doing it, and it evolved into a thing, right? So in the same way, that can happen in Lakota language as well. And especially when a language is living, there's an opportunity for people to make it their own. And young people need to make the language their own. Otherwise, it's that thing out there that grandma did, and you know, and I'm not feeling that. You know, I really want to be up, you know, today. Now I can do the traditional thing. I respect the elders. You know, it gives me some sense of value when I can say I didn't start last week, you know, from this dead people or something like that. You know, whatever other kind of mythology that put on kids, you know, in by our society, that I have value. Okay, so those two languages, one in Lakota, I don't speak Lakota, but it's important that I don't, because it wasn't really about my experience. What I did in that workshop was to show people how to create templates in which they could take their knowledge of the Lakota language and create a new art form or a different art form in their language. Because languages, those of us who are bilingual or trilingual, multilingual will say, we know that you think different in a different language. So there's never really a direct translation. There's always these nuances and wordplay on words that come into being when you're doing poetry, even more than just writing a news report. So being somebody who knows that there are all different kind of things that go along with a word as common as dog, you know, that word has a whole different kind of feeling, meaning, nuance in Lakota that it doesn't have in English or Japanese, you know? So encouraging people to say, okay, look, I'm gonna show you some templates and I'm gonna show you how to create some templates, but these are not necessarily the templates that you should have. I'm just going to introduce you to the idea of patterning, double entendres, making things rhyme at the end, using the structure of the language in a different kind of way to change the underlying meanings, things like that. In fact, you're going to teach me how to write Lakota poetry. I'm not going to teach you, you're going to teach me how to write it based on what you want to say, right? And I don't even have to know what it is. You will know what you're going to say. The people who speak Lakota, they know what you want to say. It's not important that I know. I'm not a Lakota speaker, you know? I mean, so, or it's more important that you know than I know. Okay, I'll put it that way. So that's a Lakota thing, is like, okay, how do I empower people to make a choice to express themselves and dance with a language, some of whom were fluent speakers, others were just learning to speak the language in this workshop. So, but between the two, they could help each other, because the people who are just learning, they could make a poem, and then the people who are fluent and native speakers of the language, they could say, well, you could say that, but the way that you said it, the way you turn that, you put the verb over here, that means this now, because you changed this, You know, like the words make sense, but when you put them together like you did, that's probably not what you wanted to say. And they would, you know, they get a chuckle out of that, and they switch things around.
Right.
The Japanese one is like, okay, you know, I've been doing the Japanese thing since I was like 15, 16 years old. But I wasn't speaking Japanese. I didn't start even trying to learn the language really until I was out of high school. And I learned it by osmosis. In other words, I was in Japan. I bought myself a dictionary, a little handheld dictionary, and I'd go into a coffee shop and I would bug people, you know, like try out my Japanese on them, and they see me with the book, and they were just there to relax. And so that was a relaxing thing to help this foreigner struggle through Japanese, get a few laughs out of the fact that he has no idea what he's doing, you know. And then in the process of doing that, I would, you know, like work on that person with that person until they get bored or had to leave. And then I would try the next victim that came in, you know. So then after I got some patterns, I would go out on the street and practice to see if anybody knew what I was saying. After I, you know, practice those patterns, I go out and see if, you know, if anybody threw an axe at me after I said this thing, you know. So little by little, I learned Japanese, okay? So my Japanese is a kind of a unique Japanese, because people will often say, his grammar is very interesting, but we can always understand exactly what he's saying. We don't have any trouble with his pronunciation. And that's because I didn't sit in a classroom full of people speaking English saying it wrong 30 times and a teacher saying it right once, you know? So, but people understand me, and I can move around Japan and do what I want to do and even make speech. I even had a TV show when I was in Japan, teaching people how to cook with a rice cooker, believe it or not. That was my TV show. So I can speak it. And one of the things that I learned, I became intrigued with, is the fact that the Japanese language doesn't have a lot of sounds. But so that makes it perfect for poetry, because and the verb goes at the end typically of the sentence, right? So that means that if you only have like, you know, like 3 or 4 different kind of iterations of how the verb form ends, and they only have I, E, U, A, O, and then everything else is pretty much some kind of variation of that. Then that means it's easy to make things rhyme at the end, you know, and in the middle, you know. So it's easy to make words rhyme. So I figured, wow, this is a piece of cake. You know, I may say some weird stuff, but just getting it to rhyme is not hard. You know, I could like pull out the dictionary and point to some words and put them together. So then I think, okay, well, yeah, but just because it's easy doesn't mean you should be sloppy. So I figured, well, I should be intentional about this. So I started looking for things to say that I felt was uniquely sayable in Japanese, because the words they are pretty much Japanese words in the sense that we don't have a direct translation for them in English. So mu is one of those kind of words, as is wa, you know. So I thought I would make poetry around the words that in Japanese have some easily understood meaning, easily understood in the sense that many people understand the complications of the word and the subtlety of the word because they live with it. It's used a lot in all those different iterations. So I wanted the challenge to try to make poetry about that, also as a way to introduce people to those kind of words and concepts, even though we don't have it in English. So that's how that poem in particular, and others, got done.
I don't know Japanese, even though my grandpa and my dad, just because Japanese, you know, conquered Taiwan during that time. So they can speak Japanese, they understand it very well. But not me. But I mean, I still enjoy the language very well. So like, I hope, you know, for the people who probably listen to your poem the first time, Kage Wa Mu, would enjoy it because the sound, like, you know, so we can pay attention to the how it sounds, right? Like, you know, each time, each phrase. Yeah, for us who don't know the language. Yeah.
But it's a translation. I purposely put the translation on the film because people then they don't have to call me and say, "What does that mean?" You just say, "I forgot, man."
You also put your face on it.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
love that animation.
Yeah. Well, I wanted it to be popular.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thank you for everything that you do. You're creating history, and teaching others how to use their voice and create history and make impressionable art. And you can start at any age. You could be an early starter. You could be a late bloomer. Like, just being human is art in itself. So go out and create art.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anything else to add, or?
No, I don't have anything else to add. As you say, you know, we could go on and on, but then it'd be ad nauseum. There's probably some people are vomiting already. You know, at the end of they get this far. But yeah, I just say, you know, like Zach was saying, let's go out and make art. You know, let's do something. Like, you know, these opportunities to talk about things, they're great, you know, as a starting point, but we can't stay at in the blocks. You know, we have to get out of the blocks and go run, you know, like let's go do something. And so I'm really looking forward to making some projects that get people together to discover their common humanity and exchange things. Get people to build something together. You know, whatever it is, just invite. I mean, I think that you know, I mentioned just in passing, you know, like stacking rocks at the beach, or, you know, like a beachfront, or, you know, like you have that, you know, like it's easy to find like a little lakefront or riverfront, and there's a lot of fill stones, or there are lots of farmers who have like these piles of fill stones, and find a farmer and put on your tick repellent, and then go out and arrange stones in these, you know, where they have like piles of fill stones, and ask them if you would mind if you know, this is just a pile of fill stones. We would like to go out and change this pile of fill stones into some kind of structure. It'll still be here. All the stones will be here, but now it'll be a work of art. That work of art, you know, stacking stones together and using their weight as the glue, that's how people build castles. You know, that's just this pile of fill stone. That's what castles are. So if you can build something, you know, like get artists together, you know, bring some Kool-Aid, cool drinks, and some music or something like that. And then even one or two people could do it, but getting a group of people to do it and saying everybody, you know, the only, you know, real criteria is that you, in these Corona times, wear a mask, but get some tick repellent, because you will get ticks. You know, there will be ticks, maybe even tox, but there will be ticks. So you get those, because where there's ticks, there are going to be tox. You know, get all those people together, and even spontaneously build something, you know, that's bonding. And when people go by there, suddenly South Dakota, those fill stones suddenly take on new meaning.
Right.
You know, that's just like off the top of the head idea.
Yeah,
okay?
That's great.
Yeah, but it's getting people together to create history, create art, and do it together, and then we're making art. The real art is the relationships that we build with those people who help us to make something. And you know, and once we feel that connection, now we can actually have some conversations that doesn't make the other person feel like they're responsible for something that they didn't have any real hand in. They can't really connect with feeling something about that. Even though we can make a good intellectual argument about it, they're not feeling it, you know? But once they feel a connection to us, you don't even have to say it. They start to feel like, wow, that was really horrible what those people did to those people. But we're not going to do that anymore to us. we're not going to do that anymore to the people in the future. We're going to learn from those people's mistakes. We can see, we can't, it doesn't even help to even go back and beat those people up. But the only beating we can give them is not perpetuating their craziness. You know, that's the most important beating we can give them for whatever they did to those other people, and lift up the people who didn't, who want to be something better, you know, lift up those people. Those are the kind of things we can do with art by getting people together.
Kage wa Mu. Mushoku no mono. Mushu no mono. Mumi no mono. Kage wa Mu. Mume no mono. Muchi no mono. Muzai no mono. Kage wa Mu. Itsumo kawaru no katachi. Katachi ga nai no katachi. Muzosa ni ugoku no mono. Kage wa Mu. Nani mo toranai no katachi. Nani mo agenai no katachi. Iru kedo inai no katachi. Kage wa Mu.
This background.
What does Kage Wa Mu stands for? What does it
Kage
translate?
wa Mu.
Kage.
Kage is shadow. Mu is the term that Wa is like is. You know, it's not really is, but it takes kind of the place of is in English. So the underlying question is, what is Mu? And Mu is one of those terms that we don't have in English. So as people write whole dissertations on the meaning of Mu and all of that. So I tried to use the shadow as an example of Mu, because the shadow is and it isn't. That's kind of the concept of Mu, is that something is and isn't at the same time. A concept that's understood in quantum physics, but not so much in Newtonian physics, okay? So, but the Japanese in the Japanese language, that concept is part of the Japanese framework for reality, is that things can be and not be at the same time, okay? So in this example, in this poem, it gives an example of, for example, like a shadow has form, but it doesn't have a form, right? It doesn't have, it depends on what it rolls over, where the light is and which way the light comes and hits it. So yeah, it has a form, but it doesn't have its own form. It's only, you know, it is, and it's a form and it's not a form. It doesn't have an ego, you know? It doesn't even have a color, you know? For example, try to find a red shadow. You won't see one, you know, because the shadow itself doesn't have any color. It can be over a red thing, but even if you throw a red gel on it, the shadow is always just the shadow. It is as a shadow color. It doesn't have, you know, because a shadow technically is the absence of light, okay? So the absence of light only exists when there is light. So the thing exists, but it doesn't exist. Does it go away? Well, where did it go? You know, if you turn the light off, is the shadow still there? Well, kind of, but then kind of not, you know? So all of those things go into the concept of Mu, and that goes into the concept of things like in Buddhism, we have this idea that we never see the real thing. Everything is ephemeral. Everything is concept that we create in our mind. Okay, so there are so many questions about, like, if you know, like when you're what's outside of your vision or sensory perception, how can you prove that really is still there? You know what I mean? It's like those kind of underlying questions. So this poem tries to get people to see all of these, introducing these kind of artifacts that are out there but we don't see, or illusions, being familiar with the illusions of how we think we perceive the universe, but in fact we're not really, you know. So Mu was a good example, was a good opportunity to share something. So I did that poem in Japanese, and I've read it more in English speaking, to English speaking audience than to Japanese audiences, though I've done it there too. But one, because after I wrote that poem at the end of a 3-year period that I was in Japan. And so I had, you know, like audiences that I read for there, but then shortly after that I came here and I read it quite a few times, but it's really more for an English speaking audience, even though it's a Japanese poem. And the reason is because it's in Japanese, it calls attention to itself. If I had said that the same thing in English, then I don't think it wouldn't give me the same platform to say, here's a concept in Japanese that we don't really have in English, but I'm going to try to break it down for you and then play with it a little bit and see if you don't, and just kind of like reflect on the concepts that I'm going to present. And even if you throw away all those concepts, see if you haven't changed your view after reading that, or after hearing that poem, after you consider the things that I'm going to say in this poem just by trying to explain Mu, things that you had never thought about, even if you just think about the shadow, you know, like the concept of the shadow and what it is, and what does that mean in the sense of how you see the universe. So there's all that in there.
Ooh, mysterious. I love this concept, talking about shadow and light and, you know, all those things, because yeah, I particularly love that, you know, the world is, you know, inside our head. How we perceive the world is really, you know, how we, from our experience. That's why we need to enrich our experiences, right? And we to help each other. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why you're such a world traveler, like, because you were like, when I was talking to Zach and Laura the other day, I feel like I told them, I feel like there's a lot of love coming from you, like sympathy, because you experience so many people, you have seen so many different people suffering in different ways and coming from different backgrounds. So you have that understanding and experience, probably, you know, after interacting with them, to have that sympathy. And can we say that empathy? Because I'm always get those two words. Yeah, like,
everybody gets those.
Yeah.
And you can have both.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, like you need to have sympathy and empathy, right?
Yeah. You can have both at the same time, you know, or you can have one without the other. So yeah.
Right.
But let's do something. You know, I don't mind talking, you know. I'm a wordsmith, you know, that's my comfort zone. You know what I mean? It's like I can talk all the time, you know, and even I bore myself, you know. So it's, you know, that's easy to do. What's important, I think, is what do we do? Right. What do we create? And let's find a way to get our friends and keeping, you know, together to do something, to be involved, to cross-fertilize, not just intellectual concepts, but let's do something. And especially those Zen kind of things, Zen meaning that they don't have to be permanent things. They don't have to have some kind of special, deep meaning and monumental. The fact that we're doing together, that is the thing. Doing it together is the thing.
Right.
Let's find a way to create some things, you know, even if it's like little pop-up art things in the park. You know, these are nice days. I think you guys have a nice day down there too. Chalk art is a good one. You know, if there's an issue, I'm sure that you can probably find a permit easy enough to do chalk art, because even if you don't do anything, it goes away. You know, chalk is cheap. You know, chalk is cheap. Chalk is cheap. You know, so get some chalk and then have boxes of chalk and invite kids in the park to like make some art on the ground. Give them a piece of chalk and say, draw whatever you want to draw.
Right.
You know, and those kids don't know each other, but when they start doing art, you know, then they'll start, you know, other kids will see them doing, oh, I want to do that too. They'll do it. Now their parents have to stop, and the parents have to talk to each other, or at least the parents, you know, and if left alone, all those kids in those different racial groups, they're going to do stuff together. You know what I mean? Because they don't care. You know, they're not, you know, unless their parents stop them. And then when this parent lets his kid do it, but the other kid, that kid's going to be looking like, what kind of daddy do I have? What kind of mama do I have? You know, when those kids are having fun, but I can't, you know, but when, you know, and they will cry, and just like they get them to buy bubble gum at the check stand, they'll get them to let them play with the chalk. You know, so these things are possible. Just that, and that's a cheap date. You know, if I knew somebody was trying to do that, I'd pay for the chalk myself. You know what I mean? Look, like you're talking 10, not more than $20, and you have the real potential to change lives. What else? What other thing could you do with $20?
Right.
That's that meaningful. You know. So the low-hanging fruit, let's brainstorm those things. I mean, I just throw those things off the top of my head because I, you know, I live this stuff. But you'll dream up other stuff that you can do that don't require a lot of money, and your only objective is to get people doing stuff together.
Right. Yeah.
If you can do that, that will be more important than all of the other kind of political and sociological things that we're doing. Those things will happen because you did that. Otherwise, people will still be talking about that 60 years after this. You know, down the road, they'll be still having the same conversation. But if you get people to start doing things where they feel something that they don't have to explain. They just know we feel that. We feel that thing different. When I was in Japan, I started a jazz festival, you know.
Wow.
I was one of the co-founders and organizers of the International Youth Festival in our area, where we brought all the kids from all the parts of Japan or any place else in the world. All you had to do was just show up in our town, tell somebody that that's what you're looking for, and we gave you 3 weeks food and board and entertainment and activities for a whole week, you know, just to get all of those kids from all those different places that, you know, were foreign students and stuff like that. We had that international festival, and all those people got to know each other and they made friends. You know, awesome. Whereas they were feeling lonely and isolated before, and especially people felt like, well, the Japanese don't like us, you know, they're prejudiced against us and stuff. And I remember talking to this one kid, and I got, you know, because I was the vice president of this thing, I went out, one of my duties was to go out and greet the people when they, you know, showed up. And I remember talking to these one kids and a group of kids, and I said, well, you know, what's been your experience in Japan so far? And they said, well, the Japanese are like really closed. It's really hard to get to know anybody. And they just, you know, like they kind of shut you out, and, you know, like it's really hard. It's like to try to make friends here. So it's really lonely. And so I said, well, what did you try? And he said, well, we didn't try anything. They mostly said, he said, I said, well, did you try to, you know, start a conversation with them? And they said, no, because we didn't want to disturb them. I said, oh man, the Japanese love to be disturbed. You have to disturb them, otherwise nothing will happen. So long story short, at the end, I saw some of those kids and they ran up to me and they said, hey, we disturbed lots of Japanese. So then they managed to make friends, and they managed to make, because they lived in the people's houses, the people invited them to their house. They had all these activities, and before you know it, they were having fun. I think we could do the same thing in Sioux Falls,
I think
or
so.
something like that,
Yeah, I feel like we need it here. I know people are doing more and more. Actually, that's awesome. Like within the past few years, I sense that there's more and more activities going on.
Yeah.
So we should definitely do something and keep it going. Keep this
Keep it going.
artistic trend. We create, we make friends over, we bond over activities. Yeah. So awesome.
All right.
Thank you,
All right.
Lawrence.
Well, we'll
Thank you, Zach
catch
and
you guys
Laura.
again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zach and Laura, and hey, let's party on.
Yeah.
Party.
See you later.
Have a good weekend.
All right. See you.
Thank you.
See ya.
See you.
Bye.
Hi. You're still here. Okay, so Laura. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I should stop recording it. Oh, hold on.
No, you're good.